entertainment portion of the show.
Okay, so let's get started. I wanted to talk about value proposition. And again, this isn't about INPD, but I'll stand up as a guinea pig towards the end, and you guys can give me some feedback, critical feedback, laugh at me. I don't care, whatever you guys want to do. And I know we've got some really experts on formulating value proposition on the call. So I just wanted to talk about that. That kind of came up last time. We were talking about how do you approach people, and the idea was, well, you need to have a very clear value proposition, which I think is extremely valid, but maybe not completely necessary, but definitely essential. So let's go into my little slide deck here. Let me see.
What does that mean? Not completely necessary, but essential? Are those not contradictory terms? Am I missing something?
So we will talk about.
I wasn't the only one confused.
We just let Kevin go. You never know where he's going to go.
Yeah, I'm an improviser. I believe in improvising, just having it's sort of a sense of where to go. Hang on a second. I don't know.
He's thrown 3 of these into this presentation, so we've caught the first one.
Okay.
See if we're paying attention, right?
Can you guys see that presentation?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So what's your value proposition? I want to talk a little bit deeper about that, and really specific things I want to talk about today. And actually, Moss, you kind of inspired me on this first one. Do you need to have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4? So we're going to talk a little bit about that too. And I asked you guys, the formulation of it, and is there a syntax that we should be looking at? And this is actually a good question for Moss and Wayne and Allison, who deal with branding and stuff. How is it different from a positioning statement? And should you lead with it? And the answer to that turns out, good consultant answer, it depends. That's what we all like to say in consulting. So let's just go through this real quickly. Definition, I don't know if anybody has anything they would further want to expand on this, but I just popped this up on an internet search, and I thought that was a good essence of it. And this actually was the conversation I had with Palo on the last call. We were talking about you really need to be very clear in terms of what it is, who you target and what you provide them. And the question is, can you get that into a quote unquote audio logo, or is an audio logo just kind of a wishful thinking that you can actually communicate within 12 or less words for somebody? And that's real challenging. I struggle with that all the time, and I also find that my audio logo tends to migrate from one conversation to the next conversation. So that might be a discipline thing too, but getting that right sometimes seems to be a struggle, and maybe that's also the other quote unquote fallacy of trying to get it perfectly. You don't need to get it perfectly. You just need to get it clear enough that people know what you do. Any comments on that? You guys agree with this, or
Yeah.
Where to start?
Yeah.
okay?
I mean, you were talking about how maybe you're just calling it an audio logo. I think what I would know that as is elevator pitch. Is that the same thing?
Yeah, basically the same, but a little shorter. It's almost like a meme. Yeah,
Okay.
They
Only one
they,
floor.
being the marketing networking experts, say you should be able to articulate what you do in 12 or less words, and that's really tough.
But I think the thing is the value proposition changes as to who your audience is. So
Totally.
it's about what they see as value. So if that means your audio logo needs to change in order to match what the need is that you're able to satisfy for that audience, it seems completely appropriate to change it, I think.
Yeah, I think that's correct, and that's why I was saying it depends. So I think it's contextual, and it's also contextual in the conversation. So when I wrote,
Kevin's going to love this, because I'm going to hark back to a book you wrote and some other things. It seems to me that at least today, that to Moss's point, by being able to pivot around a notion or construct like jobs to be done, you solve the problem of trying to come up with a single value proposition for a single persona or a single segment. So if I have learned through trial and error, pivoting around this notion of jobs to be done forces me to keep the perspective or the POV of the customer out there and know that jobs are different, right? So if you can move from the job of an executive is X, this is what we do for the exec. The job of a product marketer is X, this is what we do for product marketers. It cleans it up in a way that makes it more useful. I just thought.
Yeah, I have a ringer in this crowd. All right.
So we're working with a $14 billion bank right now. And one of the reasons the person chose us is I just simply said, he said, why you? Which is a good question, fair question. And I said, because we're storytellers that connect the dots and you have a great story. That was 12 words or less.
There you go. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So Mike did not see these slides, but Mike knows that I'm also a jobs to be done kind of guy. It's just a way to describe what people are trying to accomplish in their lives. And there's really two things that a value proposition addresses. We're either removing a pain or creating a gain. So that's kind of the simplified way of looking at it. And again, job to be done is just a descriptive way. I like it because it takes you out of the solution set and puts you into the problem set. And I think one of the challenges a lot of us have is we fall in love with our solutions and we forget that there's actually people out there that don't really give a rat's ass what your solution is. And we tend to optimize on the solution and the market shifts on us and we miss out. That whole body of work, that started with marketing myopia, which was, help me, Wayne, who is that? The guy from Harvard. Boy, I'm having senior moments. This is terrible. Riley's not even on the phone call. Anyway.
Christensen? You're talking about Clayton Christensen?
No. This is long before Clayton.
Okay.
Gosh, it'll come to me at some point. But anyway.
Ted Levitt.
Ted Levitt. Thank you.
Okay.
That's the man. Anyway, that to me, that was actually the genesis of the job to be done. But the point being is that people, this whole idea, people hire solutions, they don't hire products. And that's what our value proposition needs to talk to. And that's why I want to talk a little bit about, I don't know if you guys looked at that video I sent from the advanced selling guides, but that was a pretty interesting conversation I thought was worthwhile talking about. But again, in context. And you've all seen the business canvas. The only reason I wanted to pop this up is because I don't know if you can see my cursor, but the middle of the canvas is the value proposition on that whole business canvas. And what they did, and I like this model, and I bet you Mike uses this. They took the middle block out and they broke it up into this little screen, the value proposition canvas. And it just summarizes what we had just talked about. Customers have these jobs that they need to get done. They're either looking for gains or they're looking for pains, and maybe a combination of the two of them. And then on the left side here, you go through your gain creators and your pain relievers, and then ultimately you come up with your product or service. But that product and service needs to be described, or should be able to be described as a value proposition. So this is actually a pretty fun little tool. It's a good tool when you're using it with your clients too, by the way. You put your sticky notes on here and you just go through it. And what you find out, I think this is what Mike had said, or maybe it was Moss, there are different jobs that people are trying to get done. So you kind of have to filter those things out and just really focus on a specific job and create the canvas around that specific job. Otherwise, you end up with just a real mess of either a mess of a message or a mess of a product. Either way, it's not a good way to be innovative and create good solutions and actually get people's attention. Okay. So again, summarizing, what's the value proposition? Either solves a problem or gets someone to a desired future state. And this is I like this little syntax. We help X do Y by doing Z. So that's kind of a way of articulating a value proposition. Any inputs on that? Is that too simple, or is that miss the point? Or you guys have another way of thinking or working on that?
Well, that's not a value proposition. It's what you do, right?
Well, that's right, but that is the value proposition.
I don't see how it addresses one of the important elements in a value proposition, which is how do you stand out from your competitors?
Okay, well, there's two. I guess that's a fair statement. I guess what I was trying to do when I'm thinking of the value proposition, I'm thinking of it as that audio logo. And it's really, and actually, I don't know if you looked at that or listened to that podcast, but it's really difficult to articulate how you're different in a simple sentence. So, the value proposition begins to get lengthy. The question is, how do you communicate that, without getting somebody lost in the weeds? And we'll talk a little bit about that too. And it's going to summarize what these guys from Advanced Selling had to say about that. But that's a good point. It's ultimately is, why are you going to buy from me? Do you have a problem? Can I help you solve that problem? And why are you going to buy from me?
Could you add the element, whether it becomes a complex sentence or not, is to me not relevant, by saying we help X do Y by doing Z, as compared with other players who do X minus Y? I'm just following the syntax here.
I'm
So
thinking
it gets to Allison's point about differentiation without extending and making this really complex. I'm just wondering if that would work.
in terms of structure, though, I'm just thinking if we do X, what did you say? We could do X. So that you get Y, so that, and then what's the payoff? What's the part of it that's actually the point of difference? We install new tires on your car so that you have the smoothest ride on the road. That's like
how about a variation of that?
Smoothest ride on the road.
We have a subscription model tire replacement service that allows drivers to remain safe on the road at all times, unlike other tire providers who will sell you tires every 40,000 miles. You have continuous safety and support with our solution.
I'm ready to invest.
There you go.
Great business idea.
Yes, please.
Well, he's going to turn that, PMM model into a tire model. He's just going along.
Yeah, but I'm not sure about software tires.
Nice.
Wait a minute, we've got virtual meetings and virtual dating. Wait a minute.
That's right.
So for me, the value prop is really focused on literally those two words, the value proposition. So I would suggest that, and sorry for the background noise, I would suggest that the differentiation is a second level of conversation. I think the first level is, why should we talk? And this is kind of the strategic decision of to buy or not. Do I want to buy anything in this category? The second one is, why me? So why now is the first question, and that's the value prop. The differentiation in my mind comes in when you are showing how your solution to get the value prop is better than somebody else's.
That's a fair point.
Yeah, I think that's correct. And that's why it is contextual. I'm just going to flip real quick to my value proposition. That'll get us into full screen. So using that context, this is what I have. And now whether or not, this was kind of in the context of a network meeting. What do you do? So your answer, that's the context where I wrote this, is not to get deep into the details of how I do that. And that's actually a really interesting conversation too, kind of to Wayne's point, because you don't really, you're going to lose people, especially in the initial conversation, if you start saying, we do this process and this process and this process and this process, because that's not really what you're trying to accomplish, especially in those first conversations. But even in the selling conversation, you're really trying to vet and qualify. And that's kind of what the guys with Advanced Selling were trying to articulate. So one of the problems with the value proposition, we try to make this hook and get people hooked in and say, wow, I got to absolutely engage you right now. And they're saying, whoa, I think we have, our expectations aren't really in line with reality. It's kind of what they were saying on that. And I think that's correct. But having said that, still when somebody asks you in a networking context, what do you do? Well, you don't want to say, well, I'm a business consultant. Oh, so what? So that's kind of the question is, well, how do you answer that? And some people say you need to have, an audacious statement. Say, I save companies from going bankrupt. Maybe that's not audacious enough, but that's pretty audacious. But something along those lines, that it is kind of a hook, because in my mind, you always want to get from, well, how do you do that? But you don't talk about your process, and it's kind of the idea. And I think Palo articulated this pretty well last time. You really want to be more of a curious mind. You really want to be asking them questions and not telling, blah, 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 blah. And that's one of the things that I think more successful salespeople understand, is that they really need to get to the crux of the customer's problem and not trying to sell their wares, because in today's environment, it just doesn't work. I was down in San Diego last week and was for a friend who passed away. It was her celebration of life, and another friend came up to me, started to sell me on stuff on I'm turning 65 soon on Medicare. And boy, I was so turned off, and I didn't have the nerve to say, hey, leave me the hell alone. But those type of things just really turn me off. And the question is, if we lead so hard with the hook and then lead so hard with our processes, I don't think that goes anywhere.
Kevin, I'm going to just suggest, first of all, you're totally right. You should have used Duff's hand to punch that person. But secondly, invite Duff next time.
Okay, that's right. This is my fixer.
That's
I'm already
embarrassing to
half
all
taped for the
salespeople.
fight. I'm half taped for the fight.
That's right.
So thinking about, oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Mike.
So let's see. Let's see. I think my thought was that you want to help someone achieve a benefit. I think that's the focus of the value prop. Oh, and my thought was that's different in my mind, Kevin. What we're talking about right here is kind of the marketing thinking that goes behind what would be a sales pitch. So I hear you referencing this in the context of what do I say on an elevator, which I'll just suggest, guys, don't get on an elevator with Kevin, because it's like, but the having a sales conversation, I think, involves a different rhythm, in that you are introducing yourself into someone's life. And I'm not saying this from the perspective of someone who does this well, by the way. Try this at home, your mileage may vary. But just as someone who would want to be able to do this, I think we run into problems when we try to use marketing concepts in a sales conversation. And I think they need to be translated, and we should give ourselves the freedom to be able to think about how to engage human beings in an appropriate sales conversation based on our thinking that we've done about marketing.
Right. Well, and that's the contextual part of it too. I mean, presumably you don't go into a sales conversation until you've had some degree of vetting, and the question is that vetting should be coming first and not trying to slam your value proposition. And that's what the advanced selling guys were saying. You really do yourself a disservice if you start trying to assume you have a solution for somebody who hasn't even articulated that they have that pain or they have that future desire. So their thought, and I think this is where it makes sense, Wayne, and I think this is what you're saying. It really depends where you are in the sales conversation. But if you're in the front end of the sales conversation and you assume that you've got this, a solution to sliced bread, and the guy or gal doesn't eat bread, then you're kind of wasting your time. No, you're not kind of wasting your time. You are.
Can
What
I
I would
ask?
say though, sorry, go ahead, Stephanie.
I was just as a baseline question. So when we're talking about, I mean, I understand that we're kind of talking about a value proposition in different contexts, but in if we're talking about just crafting a general value proposition, are we talking about it in this conversation in regards to what is that opening salvo, or just in terms of determining whether or not this is even a potential customer, or just this is how we explain?
I think
Yes.
I think it's all of the above. And
I think that's what Wayne was talking about. He's teasing the two out. Skill set and conversation for sales is completely different than the marketing that goes behind it to talk about sales. But it reminded me when I was a younger dude going in the fast track in Wells Fargo, got the opportunity to sit with Peter F. Drucker with Warren Buffett and Bill Gates. And somebody else asked Warren Buffett how he chose board members, or how he chose to bring people on, or how he chose to go on other boards or get involved. And I was expecting this long-winded big thing, and he just simply said, I want my wife and me to go out with her husband or her wife, or whatever it was. And then I realized that and Wayne just sent out a big article about this, which is, it's a belief system. Do we have the same set of values? Because it doesn't matter what your value proposition is or how great you are at this new secret sauce if we aren't lining up and have the same values. Because if they don't like you, or you don't have the same set of values, it's really hard to do business together. So it doesn't really matter. So all that is after the initial vetting and sales talk. That's why every 3 weeks, I have Palos Parking Lot Happy Hour. I'm inviting CEOs, executive directors, politicians, COI, centers of influence, beer, wine, and we're just sitting there, we're just talking. And next thing you know, we're doing business or we're not, because we kind of line up. Now, mostly we do. That's just how we picked up the $14 billion bank. I just called the CEO and said, you want to come to have some beer and wine in the parking lot during this COVID thing? He goes, yeah. That's how it all started. It wasn't about, gee, here's my value proposition. Here's what I can do for the bank and all that crap. They don't care. So that's just, and I understand that I'm probably the only one here that sales is what I do. I don't do marketing. I don't do any of that other stuff. That's all your people's stuff. That's why I come in here and listen, because I could take that, because I'm an action implementation guy, like right now, and getting stuff done and doing the sales of it. So I like hearing this background stuff because it helps me tease it out. And practicing the art of curiosity really helps.
Allison.
I was going to just say that one of the things that I like about Kevin's syntax and structure is it's really simple. It's very seductive that way. So as an opening salvo at Palos parking lot, if somebody asks, what do you do? It'd be kind of cool to say, well, I help CEOs get the results they want by getting everybody on the same page.
Getting them drunk.
After a beer or two, right?
That's the
Wondering what's
method of
difference
getting
between
them
that
on
and
the
an
same
organizational
page.
development person.
Or I hit you.
Before I hit you.
Hurt you.
I wanted to just say, first of all, thank you for that parking lot idea, because I've been doing that since I moved into this new place. I've been having a little every Wednesday at 6:30, I bring as many people as I can from the neighborhood together. And I just got a new client last night. So yay.
Congratulations.
That's a great idea.
Good.
But I think we all do sales. Believe me, if you have your own business, we are all about doing sales. And I had kind of a realization, one of those like wake yourself up, Allison moments, where I realized I really wasn't doing sales for the last probably year, because I'd been too busy and blah, 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 moving and, all that kind of stuff. So I think that in sales, you are using your marketing information, because that's what's backing you up, right?
All that research, right? All the research, all the
Not
statistics,
just research.
all that.
And I also feel like sales is more about asking questions than it is about slamming people with your value proposition and how great you are and what you do, blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't
think
even.
that's correct.
What I meant by,
Value proposition
But
is more a
I
marketing
think-
tool.
But I think the value proposition has to come kind of early on. Otherwise, why would they talk to you? Right?
Well,
the question.
I think that's correct, but it's not necessarily the value proposition. It's really the positioning. And there is a difference. Basically, the position is, here's who I work with, here's who I don't work with, here's what I do, here's what I don't do. And that's in the conversation, especially early on in the conversation, even if you're at the sales level conversation, you need to actively vet that out. Because if you don't vet that out, you're going to get into that Seymour conversation, and you're never going to get to an answer on it. And at some point, you have to make the ask. I mean, That's certainly one of my weak parts. And I know that's, a guy like Palos figured that stuff out early on. I don't know, I think it was Wayne said there's a rhythm to it. So when somebody's giving you a note that it's time to go ahead and make the ask for God's sakes. And then when they finally say, we want you, sign the contract, don't keep on selling.
I mean, most salespeople, because they don't know that, will you do the workshop? Will you sign up? They just keep talking and they oversell, and that just blows it. But
Yeah.
getting back to what you're talking about, Allison, what I meant by, I'll be really clear, is all I do is sales. I don't do what the rest of you do. I don't do this and that. I don't do any production or anything to come up with anything. It's purely 100% sales. I'm a subject matter expert in only sales. That's all I do. And that's what I meant by it. It's 24/7. I'm thinking about it. I'm reading about it, because I don't do something else and this. Whereas the rest of you, I think you do, yes, we're all sales, but you also do other things. I mean, I could tell from Wayne when he sent out his paper and what he did, and he went through it, logically laid it out. Now I have a much better idea of what he does. And now there's a lot of psycho belief and all that kind of stuff. Now I understand, which I believe in. And so that's what I meant by it.
So why didn't we all get your paper, Wayne? Sounds interesting.
Oops, sorry, Wayne.
Meet me in the parking lot.
Wayne respects your privacy. He doesn't spam.
Okay.
So Wayne,
But
I've
if you
been
want-
going
but if you-
back to your statement about why now, why me? And, you're saying that the value proposition is the why now. It's not sitting right. I think it's why now plus why me. I feel like, getting a new set of tires is solving a problem if you have a flat tire or your tires are bare, right? But why me is why you're going to bring your car into my shop, not somewhere else. So I'm just having a hard time saying that the value proposition is only in the why now.
That's a good
Does that make
point, Kevin.
sense?
Moss.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. It does, and thank you. So honestly, I don't have a religious point of view on this, but I was making, in my mind, a distinction which turns out to be relatively vague. So I appreciate that, between saying what it is that you bring and how you are different from others. So Michael, I heard you talking about like, we do this, so you get this, as opposed to doing this other way. And I was thinking, in my mind, I would cut that sentence. The positioning to me is a bigger thing. And I'm not saying this is right. I'm just saying this is what I'm thinking. And Moss, I think we do need to say what it is that makes what we do better, but I think maybe the additional parts about how to differentiation, focusing more on differentiation, to me comes when you're doing a full positioning. But somebody else have a better idea. How do you do it, Moss?
Well, I don't know that I've solved the problem for myself, but I find one of the issues that I have, just very frankly, is that to me, it's more about a process, and I don't always know the result at the end, because a lot of times I'm working with clients, the better clients, who don't just have a predisposed need that they're looking to fill, but they recognize there's a symptom, something's wrong, and how do we solve that? And almost always, it's rare that it doesn't go back to a root cause for why that symptom occurs. And so it's like a diagnosis process, but that's not what people come to me for. They'll say, I hear you do brand strategy. I need to position my new company or whatever. And all of that's great. And that's kind of the hook, is whatever they're looking for.
Mhm.
And how do you then meet them at their level in terms of that? But then how do you segue to, in order to do this right, we need to be looking at these things.
Yeah.
And I can promise you that what comes out of that process is going to make it much more valuable going forward.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's, sticking with the symptoms, but I guess the danger we have to be careful about is when we're on so-called a selling expedition, we don't turn it into a free consulting expedition.
Right.
I thought that comes from what you just said, Moss, that hadn't occurred to me, and I'll just throw this out to the group, is that as Kevin says, it depends whether perhaps you are in an established category or not. So most of the work that we do is with B2B SaaS companies that are looking to create a need, or not create a need, the need already exists, the ones that survive. But what they do is they find a new way of defining the problem. So, enter a subscription for tires. You already needed to get places, but now there's a smarter way to do that. Yes, I'll take credit. Except that we hadn't thought about the problem in this way, and that it's not about having a tire, it's about having that continuity and safety continually. And if we're in a category that's, like ball bearings, it's already established, maybe that differentiation is more important. But I find a lot of the energy that my clients put is on defining the problem in a distinctive way. Sorry for the long ramble there.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
It is this idea of jobs to be done, and the lever using, and most SaaS companies I look at, they're reinventing things that have been around forever now, right? There's lots of software. The last count was 11,000 marketing automation applications somewhere out there in the cloud. And there isn't a need for all of them, but somehow they're all figuring out how to survive by rotating around. Average people at a certain level of income will replace their tires every so often, whether that's 20,000. If you put Pirellis on your car, you replace them every 15,000 miles. If you put something else in your tire, replacing them 40,000 miles. How do you get somebody to replace on the dot 30,000 miles of tire replacement for the life of the car? You change the buying model. You change the level of the resistance factor. Tires are not new, replacing tires are not new, but how I keep my family safe, which is my job to be done, is really what I'm really caring about. And if somebody made it easier for me to buy tires on a consistent basis, pick my car up, return it to me by noon, I got a new set of tires on, the bill is $300 a month for the rest of my life, whatever the economics need to be. That's where I kind of see the whole melding of value proposition, unique selling proposition, and elevator pitch sort of conflating on each other,
Right.
simply because we're all talking about variants of the same thing.
Right.
Start with the problem, start with the job. And I don't mean to insult any of you guys who are really good marketing experts, because I respect all of you, and I've seen some of you do your work up close, but I'm not in that category. But I've simplified this to see if it resonates. So you were talking earlier, Wayne, about how I did differentiation. I trigger off of this idea that we're not the first people out there to solve this problem. We're not new. Google Docs does this for free and has been for 12 years. So how do you stop somebody in their track and saying, already got that fixed? Got to find something else that's a pain. The pain is switching costs in this particular model that we're talking about, right? If I'm in this job and it takes me 6 tools to do a task, that's inefficient. So if I can show you how to do it in 2, that's a gain. Not that you couldn't do it in a 6, it's just a lot easier for you doing the work. That's our value proposition to our prospective users.
Yeah.
By us, well, reality is right now, nobody else has done that for you, the specific persona. In 2 years, bets are off.
But you're talking again, like you were saying, like a specific persona, right? So you would have maybe that one person, that's the thing, and then for the other person, it's another value that you have that is the. I think that's where I tripped up with, like, oh, we should have.
And when I used to do workshops for product marketing, product management, people would wince. Do you need a value prop for every single buyer persona? Probably a group of them you do, because each of them have a different, and this is now facilitating and helping the sales agent. They now reuse a term called ICP. It's a customer profile. So if I can give the tooling to sales that says when you're talking to a CIO, of a Fortune 200 bank, this is what their problems are. This is what you're saying. If you're talking to the CIO of a medium-sized insurance company, this is what you're saying. Their jobs to be done are radically different. Therefore, your value proposition, your unique selling proposition, and your differentiation has to rotate with that. Because if you come to me, I'm a medium-sized company, you come to me with problems that B of A has, or Wells Fargo, you're over my head. No, I'm not worried about that. If we got ransomware, we'd be out of business. We're never gonna have a relationship with Lloyd's allow us to write a check for $40 million. It's just over. So my value proposition and my work is stop that from happening for you, not what to do with. I'm rambling, and I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think that's correct, but I think there's a caveat, as in everything. Again, it's being very clear when you're having these conversations, what you do, what you don't do, who you work with, who you don't work with. And that when you're into the sales conversation, you need to be clear about that in your context. I don't serve, Fortune 500s, but I serve the middle companies. And same thing too, if I'm I don't want to use the word contractor, but I will, since I'm so deep in contractors. If I'm a contractor and I focus on building houses, and somebody asks me, can you build a pool? It's not my job to try to convince me I can make a pool for you. My job is to, no, I don't make a pool, but I know somebody else who does. And that's just adding value to your relationship. But again, the key thing is that value proposition is really part of your overall positioning and your strategic direction. When you start deviating from that, that's when you get into really, I think, messy conversations. And that's when your company starts to expand out of control and you're wondering, why do we have so many SKUs and we still don't seem to have, that big winner on it? Because it's easy to chase stuff. It's hard to choose and bring it down and really focus now. And it's that old saying is less is more. And I still do believe that.
I would say, Kevin, I agree with you in that the work of value prop becomes the important foundation. So I look at that as foundational. Yeah. Palo said it, give me something I can translate into selling language. And you have to do that value prop work first so that you can start to extend. I'm old school. I use the bowling pin analogy. If I determine that my optimum segment, target market, or vertical is X, then I have a foundational value proposition, which I rotate toward that vertical. I'm working with a client right now in healthcare. They sell the same solution to higher ed and to banks. But if you go to their website for healthcare, it says completely different things. It's the same underlying value proposition, but they're flipping it out to extend to the jobs to be done for healthcare. Yeah, just an idea.
I have a really fun oversimplification of everything we've just talked about, because I
like it already.
Yeah.
One word. Plastics.
3 words.
Plastics.
3 words. So you guys are way more scientific and thoughtful and prepared than I ever have been in any sales conversation, partly because I never wanted to do marketing. I fell into it by mistake. My real job was working in film and TV and, so whatever. But what I learned.
No normal people try to do this, in the 5th grade, none of us wanted to do this, Allison. This is because we all didn't go to med school, Allison. You're among friends.
Yeah.
Or didn't finish law school.
Yeah.
Don't tell my mother, by the way.
But anyway, so the 3 words that to judge everything by, to define your benefits, which I think could also apply to USP and value prop, this is all that people want. I read this somewhere. I can't take credit for it. Time, they want more time, more money, or more ease. And I think everything
is the last one. Ease.
Yeah.
Ease.
And I think everything we've just said boils down to those 3 things. So if you're promising 1 or 2 or 3 of those things, you've nailed it in a sales conversation.
Kevin didn't pay me to show up for the day's meeting, but he actually covered this on one of his early slides. Pain, gain, right? To your point, now we're down to 2 words. What pain are we going to alleviate? Or what gain are we going to provide? And I think that works from value prop foundation all the way up through the entire messaging and positioning we do. If we speak in those terms, extending on your point, Allison, then we're probably safer than getting really esoteric about it. Because I'm like you, I get really confused in these conversations, and I've been having these off and on for 25 years. When I got sucked into a marketing job and it's like sitting around watching people argue, that's not a value prop, that's a USP, that's an elevator. And it's like, stop, guys, I need a drink, you know? So
Yeah.
the simplification for me works.
But you're also really good at breaking it down to the knowing how to break it down and breaking it down into chunks that fit together that make sense. You're
No, that's
really
failed
good.
at
Is
it.
Nick, you remember what he
I have
talked
literally
about when he was
failed
a
at
The
it
kid?
a lot.
bicycle.
Yeah, I mean, when he
That
was a
was my
kid,
thing.
what did he do? He took everything apart and then put it back together. Of
Right.
course he is.
But also, if you have to do, I'm in Palo's camp. My first 15 years in tech was in sales. And there you get immediate feedback. Does this work?
Bam.
Yes, keep talking. I'm pulling out my check. Does this not work? No, I'm getting ready to kick you out of my office. Okay, what did I say that did that versus what did I? It's very Skinnerian, Pavlovian, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm saying the right things, you're doing like this, I'm going to keep talking. If you're doing like this, I know I need to change
And
the
I
subject.
exactly.
think that at the end of the day, it's really about, and this is what makes a subject matter expert versus not a subject matter expert, is conscious competency
Yeah.
versus unconscious competency. So most salespeople just stumble through a conversation and they go, wow, I got the sale. And then you come back and ask them, how did it go? How did that work? How did that, be curious, right? How did you arrive at that? As opposed to, I had this plan, I had this, I did this, I did this, I did
It's
this.
about repeatability, which,
Right.
which to your point is, you said this earlier, what marketing's value is to sales is taking the trial and error out of this, right? If marketing people are
Research.
doing their jobs, then this should come down, not to say scientific, but it should come down to something that's fungible, meaning it can be absorbed and can and understood, and it can be repeated, because that's what we want with people to go out and sell, is repeatability. Now, the challenge becomes one, because I suffer from this as well, because I kind of have some of Palo's DNA and I have a lot of marketing DNA in me, is when do you switch? And that's probably what most of us have, is when am I selling versus when, now you don't have that problem. When am I selling versus when am I solutioning versus when am I consulting versus when am I marketing? And I will tell you, on any given day of the week, I get really confused, okay? So much so that I've had to put up, go ahead, I'm sorry. I've been talking.
Mike, it's funny because we were just talking about how you break things into components, but I actually see one of your skills as kind of the inverse, which is finding the through line. And when you talk about having safe families, and that's why we want to have tires that are, not balding on our cars, and we want to ensure that on a regular basis so that there's no concern. That is the convenience, that is the even higher than time and money. But maybe that's a commonality point that can be brought up in pitching, where you say, we all want our families to be safe on the road, right? There's immediate agreement. This is a sales tactic, right? You're finding agreement. And that's why X, Y, Z. And so if we can find that through line to become the entry point of a discussion, it's so universal that it's unlikely. And if that person does not relate to that through line, they're probably not your customer.
Yeah, move on.
Right, exactly.
I love that. I love that idea though, Moss. I wonder, I feel like I would struggle to figure out what that through line was for me, but.
Well, how about starting with talking to some of your clients? Because they're the best ones to tell you what the through line is. I did an exercise about, this is going back, started when Kevin and I were doing work together, is I actually paid a marketing person, I'm a consultant, does marketing, to go out, because it wasn't going to be me. I couldn't go out and say, hey, Bill, you just paid us $100,000. You tell us why. But I sent somebody out to basically survey a group of our clients to tell us what they liked and what they didn't like. And I had the little consulting, well, you sure you want to do that? I'll be damned if I don't, because you know what? They're thinking this stuff right, wrong, or indifferent. I might as well know. And it did a number of things. It showed us where we were missing the mark. I mean, there were places we just weren't hitting it. But more importantly, it showed why would they come to us in the first place? What problem were they trying to solve? And then what made some of them that did come back? And that's the piece that I want to understand. Why do they come back for a second drink?
Yeah.
And that to me is the most telling thing. And you got to have a strong skin, got to have some good exterior skin, because you're going to hear the raw, naked, unvarnished truth, especially if you send a third party out to do it. Somebody unassociated with you. Hey, I'm doing this on behalf of Allison's company, blah, 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 because they'll tell you what they think. They won't tell you, Allison, because they don't want to hurt your feelings, but they'll tell this third party.
But you also get the aha moments out of that too.
Yes.
And that,
One of the things
that's
that
what,
we do.
hang on a second, Bill. That's also what Christensen talked about, the jobs to be done, is just the idea of people are using your products and solutions a lot differently than what you think they're using it for.
Yeah.
And the only way you can figure that out is to talk to them or have a third party talk to them, because there is a reluctance, I think, if we ask our clients, how did we do? They're going to probably answer in a sugar-coated way.
Yeah.
Whereas, to Mike's point, they're more likely to talk to a third party a little bit more open. And there could be the negative sides of it, but that's, there's also the positive.
It's all about improvement. I mean, if you're missing the mark for somebody and it's repeated, not just an isolated case, you have somebody talk to 10 people, they all say the same thing. Guess what?
Well, I think you're
asking what you're doing.
I think you're asking the wrong question. So we have 462 clients and we go see them every year, and we ask them only 2 questions. What works about daily digital imaging for you, and what does not work about daily digital imaging for you? It's not a good or bad, it's just what works. And that's a different framing of the conversation. And I bring the CEO of our company with me so they know this is a big deal, because she doesn't go out that often. And so when they ask the question, because what works for you might not be the same that works for somebody else. So I think it has a lot to do with the framing of the question, and also sales technique. We're being curious. We practice Kaizen, always continuous improvement, a Japanese term. And that's how I frame it, and to help me help you when you need it. And the things that I thought, the top 5 things, the top thing that I thought they used us for was 6. And the top 2 or 3 things that they thought that worked about us never even occurred to me.
So,
Now,
in true transparency, we're all smiling, laughing because of what Wayne put in the chat.
what did he put in there? I didn't put it. What did he say?
Want to say thank you all for defining what my product is. Knowledge is bliss. That's exactly what it is. I'm the third party who goes out to interview your clients to find out what the value is, why they value you, which is often not, I'd say 90% of the time, not what you think it is.
Right.
What issues, what changes, what solutions, what improvements can be made, which are rarely things that people know, and usually really simple, not critique, but simple solutions, right? Belo's nodding.
Oh,
And
also, that's a
having
good
a
breakthrough.
third party do it, just so you know, in case you're thinking of doing that, having a third party doing it. The other reason you get better information from a third party is because they don't feel like they have to edit by having you understand by explaining what it is that they're getting from you, if it's not what you think you're selling. And so people are afraid of the judgment of that. And B, they're afraid if they say, God, they're so great, they're wonderful, that you'll raise your price. So when they tell me,
I've actually-
We're gonna raise our prices every year anyway.
I've done these.
Inflation.
The
I've done these
risk of
calls.
doing this, the risk of doing this as an account review is your client is conditioned for you to sell them. And if you want to take that out of the picture and get transparency, you do a third party. The other piece is, and I learned this, like I said, I carried it back for 15 years. The other reason you do this, if they have an issue with your account exec, I ran a sales team and my sales exec was like hitting quota. And I only learned through third party, we were forced to take Gartner in to do this exact work, was that this guy had an issue inside this customer. Yeah, we're buying from him because your product is the best. But if we could pick somebody else to represent us, we'd do it. And I'm not saying that you're doing anything wrong. There may be chemistry issues. So now how do you buffer that? So there is a transparency that happens by doing a third party. And I literally, when I did this, I, you know, like hold my ears and cover my mouth and my eyes because but we got some things back that were useful to us that we wouldn't have gotten if I had been involved or if the consultant that did delivery had been involved. It just wouldn't have come out that way.
So I've actually done that for clients where I'm going to both their internal staff as well as their sales force and then their customers. And I look at multiple tiers of customers because you don't want to just hear from your best customers.
Right.
And the rule is if the information is amalgamated, the client does not know who said what.
Right.
Yes.
And with that caveat, people can be very frank.
Right.
I like to say it's de-weaponized, right?
Yeah.
You're not here to pick on Joe, the sales rep, or Mary, the customer support rep. We're here to give you insight that you can basically work from. And
Yeah, you know, the other problem of doing it yourself is like when you're going out trying to get product requirements. I'm sure a lot of you have been out with engineers trying to get product requirements. Next thing you know, you're getting into an argument why this solution is the right solution for you. You're not listening. So it's that cognitive bias that pops in, and you know, it's easy to fall into that, especially, you know, if they're saying something that's kind of ouching you, you know, ooh, then you become defensive. And so, yeah.
Or worse, they're confirming what you already know. So see, I told you we should go build this. He just told you we should go build it.
Exactly right.
You know, the only other thing is when you have for those of you who might want to go find a third party, you want to make sure that third party gets what, you know,
Great
is
point.
very sensitive
Mhm.
and has a lot of interviewing experience so that they're representing you in a way to your clients. And if the client says something, you know, needs improvement, that their behavior is accepting and listening.
Yeah, they're not going to get defensive.
Right.
Although there are times when I've had to defend my client in somebody's critique by, you know, if they said, well, but they were always late on the call. And then I'd have to say, well, I know about that situation and it was, you know, the phone company blew up or whatever. You know, I mean, so sometimes there needs to be some discussion, but it's just, I can't tell you how invaluable it is, isn't it, Moss? To do
Yeah,
this.
although I would say that my position has been not to defend or not. I'll just say if something very negative comes up, that's really great information. Can you tell me more?
Exactly.
And you know, I'm not trying to make it sound like somehow they were right and the company was wrong or vice versa. It's just sounds like really valuable information.
Yeah, well, that's a trained interviewer knows how to do that stuff, and they know how to ask that question, Moss, and tell me more about that. And oh, that's interesting. Why did you say that? And those are the conversations you want.
Which is part of the reason why I've started with scripts, but the scripts, you know, inevitably get deviated from based on the conversation itself.
Yeah. Well, that's why I always use anchor questions, is maybe 5 or 6, and use them as anchor questions. And those anchor questions also, if you're recording it, it helps you find them too when you're doing the transcripts. So, you know, obviously there's a lot of techniques but the key technique is you have to have some sort of understanding how to interview people, and you don't take that defensive stuff and you don't start selling. And that's, like I said, with going out with the engineer to trying to find information, they go into selling stuff and then they get defensive. I remember I worked with a market research person. She said she went out with an engineer and they were doing UI stuff, and the customers, well, I don't understand this. And then the engineer just got livid. No, this is so obvious. you cannot judge your own work, especially a user interfaces. Knowledge is definitely the enemy again of progress. And I think it was the Heath brothers that talked about the issue is that learning curve. You reach a point where you assume all these things and you just miss really what's happening.
Allison made a point that I think having someone do this that understands your business is most important. Because a lot of people are survey fatigued and interview fatigued.
Yeah.
And the biggest barrier they put up is if the college intern is the one reading the scripted questions, they just they flatline on you. We all do that, right? We can tell, we know. So this is a vote for maturity, for business savvy, for business acumen in doing this, because even if they're not an insider, just the fact that they know how to parse this thing is critically important.
Yeah, there's a skill. Okay, guys, we're at the top of the hour. This was a great conversation.
Sandra, I got one question for you.
Yeah.
Sandra, I got one question for you. So I keep getting these things from LinkedIn that say you've got all these views, blah, blah, but got these views, got these views. What does that mean other than you got a bunch of views? Or are they just trying to let you know, just what is that all about?
Views just mean the number of people who might have seen your content in their newsfeed if they happen to be looking at that time. I call it LinkedIn's love for you. Comments and likes are people's like for you. They're actually reading it and looking. Views are, LinkedIn's putting it out there for people to see. If nobody's responding, then people aren't interested.
It's just like me walking into the men's clothing store, want to see the latest things, and then just walking out without buying anything. You were here. That's all that is.
You touched a tie on the rack.
I'm gonna delete all that crap. I didn't think it meant anything, but I just thought I'd confirm it with the subject matter expert that you are.
One procedural thing that I love to try is in the reactions, there's a I don't know what it's like, a part